it would mean a lot to everybody if the Sonics get back here. And I believe they are. I believe with the new arena they've got built, and I think the NBA wants to come back here. But for the 6 guys who have their jerseys in the rafters, and for the next couple guys in line, who I believe are named Gary Payton and Sean Kemp,
Yeah,
I
of
can't
course.
imagine what it would. Let me ask you, what would it mean? I mean, how much did it hurt to see the Sonics leave, and then what would it mean to you to see it come back here and to see that jersey 24 again hanging up in the rafters?
Oh gosh, it would be so awesome to see the Sonics back in Seattle. And it is, it is very important that the Sonics are back in Seattle because the Sonics gave the NBA all of its wealth that it has today. When Sam Schulman and I fought this case, breaking up the 4-year rule, because before I came along, you had to wait for 4 years after your high school class had graduated before you could go into the NBA. And at that time, we only had 14 teams. And so the NBA didn't have a draft pool in which to pull from. So breaking that rule, we were able to expand to where we are today. And also it gave the owners have had a chance to increase their ownership in terms of dollars, because each team at that time was averaging around 300 to 500 million dollars, and now they're sitting around $3 billion. So Seattle has given us all of this for the NBA. So it's just only fair that we have this team back in Seattle. And I was recently with Gary Payton, and I was saying, it would be nice to see your jersey hanging up. It's almost like you could see his eyes kind of welting up a little bit, because, we are talking about bleeding Sonics here. I'm talking about he bleeds Sonics through and through. And I threw the idea out to him. I said, you're such a great coach, and I watch him, with his coaching career. And I said, wouldn't it be ironic that you would be the first coach to coach the new Sonics when they come back? And we both started choking up and just gotten, really overwhelmed. And then I said, man, you and Sean Kemp, man, will be the next 2 on the line for the jersey retirement. And he's just beside himself. And I love him. I love both of these gentlemen. I love the Sonics. I love Seattle. Remember when I came to Seattle, I came from Denver, and I was landing. Sam had picked me up. They picked me up on the private plane. I was coming into Bowen Field, and I was looking over, and I couldn't believe what I was landing in. And so I was telling Sam Schulman, it looks as if I'm flying into a postcard. It was so beautiful in Seattle, the trees, the water. So it was just a beautiful trip. And then when I landed, we had a young ball boy who was there greeting me as well, with Lenny Wilkins and Rod Thorne and Tom Masheri. And at that year, we had no one coaching in a suit. Everybody was a player coach.
Right, because Lenny kind of ran the show, right?
Yeah, Lenny was the head coach. Rod Thorne was the assistant coach, and Tom Masheri was the associate coach. And we all had on uniforms. And then we had Rick Welts, who was the ball boy at 15. And he was escorted to send me around and to be with me, because we were closer in age than Lenny and the other guys, because he was 15 and I was 20. So we would ride over to Seattle University, over to the University of Washington. It was just a beautiful time.
What was it like on the court? You could compete, you could hold your own from the minute you stepped in. You had one of the great seasons, and maybe the greatest season in ABA history. Then you come up here and you can compete right away. But as you mentioned, age-wise, you were, I hesitate to say you were a kid, but you were a real young man, and maybe even bordering still on a kid. And suddenly here's Lenny Wilkins, here's Michelle, here are these men that you're playing with. How tough was that for you to kind of come to grips with and to assimilate into?
Well, to assimilate into it, I don't want to forget Garfield Hurd, Don Koges, Zayd Abdulaziz, which was Don Smith at the time, Dick Snyder, all of us they were protectors for this young guy coming in. And at the same time, I was going through this Supreme Court. So our first game at the Sonics, I walk out on the floor and the NBA had hooked me up with an injunction. And they said, ladies and gentlemen, he will play tonight's game, but after tonight's game, he has a 10-day injunction. So he has to not play again. So I would sit at the Washington, the Washington Towers, Washington Plaza at that time, which is the old Westin Hotel, and just look out over that water and say, wow, one of these days soon. And then when I got a chance to play, the next time they said, ladies and gentlemen, we have an illegal player on the floor. This game is being played under protest.
Right.
And so they would boo and throw things on me and say, go back to college. You can't play in the NBA. We don't allow that here. This is not the ABA. Come on, what do you think this is? And I was like, I got Lenny, I got Tom Sherry, I got Rod Thorne, I got the Sonics, I got Sam Schumann, who is backing this whole process, And so I went out and kept playing, and we went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court looked at our case and said, we send young men to the war in Vietnam. We do all of these things, and this is the only sport, I remember distinctly, this is the only sport other than football where you cannot go in as a young person and play. You got tennis where they playing 14, 15 years old, 16. You have hockey, you have baseball, all of the other non-revenue sports for the colleges and the universities. You could go in and play early. Revenue sports, which is basketball and football, they said, no, we want to stick you in here for 4 years. And so to kind of make our revenue going. But by the way, we are a nonprofit.
Right. Sure. Well,
Sure.
and the thing is, you not only had the physical skill, the basketball ability to compete, you had you could legitimately look anybody in the eye and say, I have got to help my family. You were coming from a very poor background. Talk about your mom and about the situation in Mississippi, and then you ended up in Detroit. But you weren't somebody just out here to just prove a point. You were really trying to get money for your family.
Yeah, well, I'm from a farming community, which is not farming, but they call it sharecropping, but it wasn't sharecropping. It was just, you were owned by the farmer, and you would go out and you pick cotton from sun up to sundown, you plant cotton, you would do all of the field work. And so my family had been doing that since they were born, since they were, brought over in this country to do that type of work, and slaves. And so my mom had been working for all of those years, and her back had went out. And so she couldn't drag the sack of 100 pounds. So she was crawling on the ground, picking cotton for $2 a day. And so I had to go up north to Detroit to finish my high school because the farmers had decided that this is a big kid, and the best way to keep him on the farm and make him a good farm worker is to put him in jail for a little while, and then he's relegated to the farm. So they had put me in jail for a couple of nights, and then I got out of jail, and then my mom shipped me right off to Detroit. So when I arrived in Detroit, I was just trying to finish my high school and maybe go to college down in Bowling Green State University, where my brother had went to college. But my mom was just struggling and struggling. My family was still struggling, trying to survive on $2 a day. And here's the opportunity to go play professional basketball. And I had to take the opportunity because my family was dirt poor. There was no other option for me. I was the breadwinner. I was the gifted one. I was the one that everyone looked at and said, this is the guy that can bring us up out of slavery. So the opportunity came about, and Sam Schumann, my gosh, he put his franchise on the line.
Yeah.
The Sonics was put on the line for this case.